Hello, the guest today is Lisa Rangel, a class of 92. She is an expert in finding work and having good resumes. Hi, Lisa. What are the
I'm so
hello?
happy to be here.
What are the steps of finding a job?
Finding a job in today's climate is difficult, but what we're seeing is networking really being the key, which is, the work that you're doing and bringing Cornellians together is just such a great way for that to happen for so many people, especially if networking's a little hard for them. But I would say every way of getting hired can fall into three buckets. The first bucket being networking, it's about maybe like how 65-70% of hires happen. And networking can be really loosely defined, right? It can be corporate alumni, college alumni, professional association, conferences, networking on LinkedIn with people you know, people you don't know. I mean, I can go on and on and on, neighbors, friends, that sort of thing. And then about 20%-ish, 20-25% of hires happen through job postings, which is getting harder and harder to really break through, but it's still definitely a way that people get hired. And then the third bucket is through third party or fee based recruiters. And by fee based, I mean the company is paying the recruiter. A candidate should never pay to be placed. That's typically a model for scam. So when I say fee based, it's just that you're getting placed by a third party recruiter who will be compensated by that company for identifying you as the client. And that's about 10 to 15% of hires. So, I just suggest allocate your time accordingly. Spend most of your time networking because that's really how the lion's share of most good hires happen. And sometimes you'll even stumble upon a job that maybe wasn't posted, but then will get designed around you because you met somebody and they see what value you bring.
What's the example of how networking would find a job?
Like just recently went to PCCW this weekend, right? A Cornell women's group networking event. Essentially, it's meant to the group supports higher education initiatives by women and female professors, associate professors and graduate students. But there's networking that happens. There's people who are there looking, whether they're currently working and looking for a job or not working and looking for a job. And there's people who are helping each other, vowing to talk after the session. If you're being proactive, there's often a list of who's coming to these events. And even other conferences now do this. They tell you who's coming once you've registered, and you can reach out to people proactively and set up meetings. So set up meetings before and after the event. And then, sometimes people say, look, I can't afford to go to conferences. Well, you can also reach out to people saying, I'm not able to come. I would love to chat. I saw you post about the event on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. I'm sure you had some great experiences. I wasn't able to attend for whatever reason. I would love to chat with you anyway, right? So like I actually did that with a few people because I was like, hey, are you going before the event? I was like, hey, are you going? They're like, no, I can't. I was like, all right, let's jump on a chat. So just, you can, I would say no matter what you're going through or whatever the event is, look at it as a way of how can you make it work versus like the 50 ways it won't. Because there's always a way it won't work. But if you're unable to attend an event, look and see who's posting about it and ask for a chat. You can also, I always tell people a question I always ask is if you have, like 1,000, 500, 20,000, whatever amount of LinkedIn connections, and people are like, I don't know how to network, I don't have anybody to talk to. I'm like, all right, you have 500 connections, you have 5,000 connections, whatever the number is. When was the last time you reached out to each of your connections to just say, hey, we've been connected for a while, we haven't chatted, would you be open for a chat? Or, hey, we worked together 3 years ago. We haven't talked. Are you up for a chat? Asking people to chat without leading with, hey, I'm looking for a job. Do that before you need to look for a job. And if you're if you're in the throes now of looking for a job, and that's your reason for reaching out, just reach out anyway without mentioning that. And don't lead with that when the conversation happens. Let them get to that. Odds are they may be in the same boat, and that's why they said yes, right? So, but just don't complicate it and just reach out to people.
If you're looking for a job right now, what should the typical week look like?
I would break out your time. If you're looking for a job, if you're currently working and looking for a job, admittedly, you may not have 40 hours a week to look for a job. So if you're able to spend 5 hours looking for a job, or a day on the weekend looking for a job, or an hour each day before or after work looking for a job, whatever your time allocation is for looking for a job, I would break it up by those percentages I gave you. And if you're going to make a mistake on your allocation of time side of networking more, then submitting to job postings or hoping a third party recruiter is going to place you. So I would spend most of your time reaching out to people and networking. And if you're going to apply to job postings, I would make sure you're applying to the job posting, but then reach out to people at the company, whether it's at the company or people tangentially related to the company, and not just the recruiters. If you're a controller, reach out to the CFO, right? Or the VP of finance. If you're a CHRO, reach out to a fellow person that would be on the executive committee with you, or even the CEO. If you're a staff accountant, reach out to the accounting manager. Like, reach out to the people that you might report to, in addition to who the hiring people are, because the hiring people are getting inundated. So you may have to try some different ways to try to get noticed. But the key to remember is a job search is a sales process. The product you're selling is you. So, I often tell salespeople or marketing people, you wouldn't sit around and wait for somebody to find you. You wouldn't just submit RFPs all day and hoping to get sales. You'd be out networking. You'd be out networking before the RFP was issued to understand what's happening at the company. You wouldn't play the lottery for your retirement plan, right? So it's the same thing. You have to do small actions consistently in reaching out to people to start nurturing and building a network that you can either use now if you're looking, or to be able to use later when you might be looking in the future. But allocate your time accordingly. And if you're not working, your job is to look for a job, and you have the benefit of having more time to look. And, that may sound a little strange for people to say the benefit, but listen, if you're currently working, the benefit is it's easier sometimes to find a job when you have a job, but the downside is you may only have like 3, 4, 5 hours a week to do your search. If you're not working, obviously there's some downsides to that on many levels, but the upside is you have more time to look and more time to go to these events. So you always got to look at what the positive is of your particular situation. You always have to look at how you can make it work versus like the 5 ways it won't work, because there's always a way it's not going to work. I don't say this lightly, but the attitude of possibility really in the mindset, the job landing mindset, is really important to help you find opportunity in this chaos versus like always looking for the way it's not going to work.
In sales, there's like a sales funnel where you
Right.
have like lead and qualified lead. Like, is there a similar kind of funnel you build up
Yeah.
to?
We design a specific plan for clients based on their time allocation for, like if they have 5 hours or they have 40 hours to do for a search. But, if you're currently working, I would say, even if you reach out to 2 people a day, obviously if you can do more, great. But like, I would say you really are not going to get any traction if you're not reaching out to at least 2 people a day. And in the spirit of networking, you can be very strategic about it. If you're trying to do a career change, pick the people you might report to in an industry that you're targeting, and do 2 people a day. And it's simple as like, in the spirit of networking, I'm reaching out, simply just for a conversation. Would you be open for a chat? No agenda. And these are things that I write. No agenda, no sales pitch. That's what I write. And that might be somebody who's a 2nd or 3rd degree connection in an industry that you want to get into. Or if you want to do the suggestion I made earlier that, you have 2,000 connections and you realize you don't talk to people very often, you can be like, hey, if you go to somebody's contact information, it'll have the anniversary date that you connected. You might say, and if you don't even go to the connection date, you can still pull this off with reducing steps of finding that information. But you might say, hey, look, we've been connected for a while, but we've never chatted. Would you be open for a chat? Or we've been connected since October 2023 and we've never spoken. Would you be open to a networking chat? No agenda, no pressure. I even say, consider it an open invite. Because then if people are not active on LinkedIn, but they stumble upon your message, say 2 months from now, they'll still take you up on the chat, not feeling bad that they, didn't answer you right away or something like that. So I'll say no agenda, no pitch, open invite. You let me know whenever it works. That's it. And just put it to the universe. Don't worry if they don't get back to you. Just keep putting out stuff, knowing that there's always going to be a percentage that will get back to you. So if you're putting out 10 of those and they're cold, you're having a great day if you get 1 or 2 responses. If they're people and you put out 10 of those, you're having a great day if you get maybe 3, 4, or 5 responses. Don't worry about the 5, 6, 7 that didn't respond, or the 8, 9, 10, the 8 or 9 that didn't respond. Focus on the ones that respond, and then don't worry about the ones that didn't, and go find another 10. And just keep it consistently moving, focusing on the attention you get. There's 100 reasons why people may not respond in the moment. Of which I am not going to get back to Tony, is probably not one of them, They may think you're looking for a job and they don't have anything, so they feel a little bad and don't respond. They may be super busy. They may be away. They may be dealing with an illness. They may, right? I mean, they may have had a meeting that may have, the LinkedIn inbox is a little bit of a mess. They may have just missed it and they don't even realize it. There's 100 reasons why. So just focus on the ones that reply and don't worry about the ones that don't, and just rinse, repeat tomorrow.
That makes sense.
You know,
After you have a conversation with them, like what kind of personal branding do you try to build up with them over time? Like, what do you want them to remember about?
some of the old school recommendations would have been like, mail them an article, cut it out and mail them an article. Well, the good news now is you can do that via message with a link, right? So like if you see an article that makes you think of someone, you can say, "Hey, I enjoyed our chat a couple weeks ago. Just saw this article based on what we were talking about. Just wanted to share it with you." That's it. You don't even have to ask for anything. You don't, I mean, sometimes it's just a matter of saying you're thinking about somebody. Sometimes even just reaching out, but they don't get back to you. It's not that they didn't like talking to you or you didn't offer value, but like I believe even if you drop a note and they don't reply back for all the reasons I mentioned earlier, right? It could be 100 reasons why they don't get back to you. I think the odds are they saw it and it registers, right? And why do I think this is the case? I wish I had money and time to like prove this, but we all belong to different social media channels in some variation, and we can see that people, we can see where where their kids went to school, what they ate for dinner, where they went on vacation, God forbid, who passed away. Like you find out all this stuff about people, but you've never talked to them or you haven't talked to them in years. So I firmly believe if you send an email or a LinkedIn message, odds are they're seeing it too, and they don't have time. So you could, if you had a conversation and they said they would do something for you and they don't, or they forgot, even if you 3-4 weeks later say, I really enjoyed our conversation. I just wanted to stay on your radar. If you get a minute to, do the intro to X, or maybe you've changed your mind and it's not suitable anymore, that's fine. But just staying on your radar, reiterating my interest in the thing we talked about. I know you'll get back to me when you can. That's it. And don't expect a response, because now you've not built in an expectation that somebody's going to possibly disappoint you on, right? So mentally you feel a little free from it, but then they may actually respond, because now to be a hero, the only thing they have to do is respond.
Yeah.
So you've set the expectations low enough that they may actually respond and feel good that they made you feel good. But when you build in the expectation that they can't meet, then people they ghost. They don't respond typically, because nobody likes to say, "I can't do that anymore." Or, "Oh my God, I forgot, I'm sorry." Like everybody's heavy right now for various reasons, and don't be another piece of heaviness. If you build no expectation into it, now they can be a hero, or they can actually let it go without feeling guilt. So that's how I suggest for people to stay on top of conversations, stay on the people, use that phrase, "I'm just staying on your radar." Get back to me when it's suitable. And then again, your responsibility is to just have more in the pipeline, right? Whatever that may look like for you. I'd say at the minimum, you got to do this 10 a week, 2 a day, if you're doing 5 days a week. The more you can do, the better, right? Like, again, this is a sales process. So the more you do outreach, the better off you're going to increase your odds of landing conversations, which are going to lead to the jobs. But at the minimum, do the minimum, But I'd say if you can do 10 a day, that would be great. But some people may not be able to do that, and I'd rather you do 1 or 2 than nothing.
A lot of these people, they talk to like 10 people a day as well. Like, how do you stand out in their mind?
Great. That's a really great question. Be curious. Ask them questions about their life versus their work. Ask different questions. There's like, I'm an introvert that plays well with extroverts, and nobody ever believes that when I say it. But when I started, realizing I needed to do this for myself when I was about 27, this is, almost 30 years later now, but I realized I was terrible at having like small talk and just having conversations that weren't just like, let's get things done. Like every conversation isn't about getting things done. You just need to talk to people sometimes, right? And there was a book called The Art of Small Talk by Deborah Fine that I still have and I still reference. And it's not a book that you can sit down with. I mean, you could, but I didn't do it this way. It's not a book that you have to sit down and read cover to cover to learn the art of small talk. It's literally a book that you can like open it up and it'll probably give you questions you can pull out. Like pull out 1 or 2 questions that you're going to do or ask before going on a conversation with somebody. A way to use AI is, I'm about to have a networking chat with XYZ person. Here's their LinkedIn profile, here's their bio, or whatever you can find about them. You know, what would be some non-work related questions that I can ask just to spark conversation? That's a way to use AI to help you, right? Without necessarily buying a book, although I think Deborah's book is great and still relevant to this day. If you're not a great small talker, train yourself on it, whether you're reading, whether you're using AI to do it, whether you hire a coach to do it. I think that's really the way to build a moat around ourselves in this market with AI and, all the things. I think you being a good conversationalist and making people feel connected with you is a superpower. And that's what your ability to influence people, your ability to rally people, your ability to lift people up will then, that's never going to, in my opinion, be able to take over by AI. And if you can do that in a conversation, they will start to remember you for the thing that you know how to do when it becomes available in their organization.
Like initially, you first contact them, and over the years, you maintain that relationship. Do you have any
Yeah.
tips on maintenance of relationships over decades?
Absolutely. I mean, when I recruited, I recruited for 13 years before I started my company, Chameleon Resumes, and I still have people that I placed and I recruited calling me now.
Oh,
I mean, my company was started in 2009. So I still have people now calling me going, "You placed me in blah blah blah," or they've hired us 2 or 3 times in my current company, and it started because I was a recruiter with them a bazillion years ago. I think even if like just some other things, like I had a networking event I went to the other night, and I reached out to people going, "Hey, are you going?" They're like, "Yeah, I'm going." And then I went, I didn't see them there, and 2 days later, I was like, "Hey, is everything okay?" No guilt for not going, but like, I just want to make sure you're not sick, everything all right. That's a touch point. That makes people feel like you remembered and you missed them. And then, they tell you why they missed it. And if they're sick, you wish them well. If they're like, "Oh, I had work to do," you're like, "Oh, what's going on? And how can I help?" And it just, again, just be human with people. It's not always like, "I'm looking for a job, I'm looking for a job, I'm looking for a job," Like just be human and interested and ask simple questions that just get people talking about themselves. It's not easy, but it's not complicated. I think a lot of times we complicate things out of fear, which I get, but it's all very doable, even for those of us that it doesn't come intuitively to.
how about a career trajectory? Like when you first graduate, less about networking, more about job applications. But over time, as you grow higher in the hierarchy, do you go more on the networking side and less on job app? What's
You
the
know, that's a really good question. I have found the stats I gave earlier to be applicable at almost any level. My one child landed a job by networking when she was initially rejected by the job submission, her first job out of school. So and my son's the same way. He really didn't do the submission thing very often. He just went and walked in, and talked to people or network through a school, alumni, that type of thing. It doesn't mean that going through a job posting is not fruitful. It absolutely is fruitful, and it absolutely should not be something that's ignored. Systems are not perfect, and sometimes you might get rejected one way and sometimes you get in another way. That also includes networking. You might have somebody who doesn't think you're right, but you submit, and through another channel you get through. The key is to view, the same way sales, right? There's not one way to sell. There's not one way to get hired. Yes, every way of hire goes into one of those buckets I mentioned earlier, but that doesn't mean there's only 3 ways of getting hired. There's hundreds of ways of getting hired. I once got an interview because I commented on a blog post, and they're like, "I love your position. Would you like to talk about the job we have here?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So it's, again, being interested and curious and putting yourself out there, being willing to be ignored or rejected, and realize it's not personal, and then you just rinse, repeat, you know.
I guess over the years too, as you build up your network, it's easier to reach out to warm connections over time.
Yeah, and then you're getting rejected less because you start having more people you need to just simply know and reach out to, right? Like in the beginning, you may only have 100 people and once you go through those in a week, you got to start reaching out to people you don't know. But if you get to a point where you have 5,000 connections and you genuinely know most of them, well, it's going to take you some time to get through those before you really need to go to people you don't know. So, yeah, that's a great That's a
Yeah. How about from the other side's perspective, like from the recruiter perspective? What are things that a good recruiter could do to meet more people and recruit better talent over time?
Recruiting right now is really under a lot of pressure because,
Oh,
they're obviously pressured to find whether they're paid recruiters, commissioned recruiters as a third party recruiter or corporate recruiter. Pressure is similar, right? You're supposed to find the right talent, and obviously that talent's supposed to work out and not leave or get fired, right? Like you're supposed to do a long-term match and you're supposed to do it quickly. And there's an onslaught of people available, that all should be treated the same way through the process. But sometimes that's just a challenge when you're dealing with, 500 candidates or 2,000 candidates. Like a recruiter's not going to be able to most likely review every person humanly, especially if they want a timely response, right, and a timely fill. And every company's different. Some companies will have the recruiter go through every applicant with a human eye. Others are going to depend more on, the sorting mechanisms of the system, whether it's a Boolean search, whether it's an AI agent, whether it's, some are more sophisticated than others. And then hopefully the ones that are using a lot of the systems to sort have people that are auditing and checking what's not getting selected to make sure they're doing the right job. And, but again, some companies are great with governance and others aren't, right? Every company is different. There's no one way to hire, there's no one way to use these things. So, anyone that's involved with sort of software or system purchases knows that every company that makes an investment in a software or a system or something, there's customizations and there's, adaptations that are made to that particular company's process and culture. So there's no one way to really do anything. That's why people need to really be open and realize this is a sales process, that you need to try different ways. You may need to try different ways because, to get back to your what are things a recruiter can do, is, I mean, there's a recruiter I follow on LinkedIn, and many of them for that matter, but one I just had a brief exchange on a post yesterday was like, we're committed to giving people feedback the way it used to be. And that's not going to be feasible in a lot of companies, but I commend them, right? Because I think that's important. But I also, as someone who coaches job seekers, I coach them for the sake of their mental health and for the sake of their ability to keep moving forward. I said, don't expect it. Don't expect it, and be positive, be pleasantly surprised if you get it. Because if you're devastated every time you don't get feedback, you're not going to be able to get up in the morning to go look for the job the next day. So I'm not being negative, just being realistic. But I love that recruiters are trying to give feedback and realize that there's a user experience even when you're rejected, especially if you've been through the process. Like if you've been through a process 3-4 times, you should get a call that you're not chosen. And I think there's a lot of recruiters that are trying to work back towards that, which I think is admirable.
How about like a manager within a company and they want to hire someone good for their team? What's the best way? Does the manager go through recruiters now, or does the manager go through their existing network?
All of it. Them going through a third-party recruiter is going to be dependent on their company organization that they work for, allowing that to be budgeted for. But, if it's not allowed, then they are dependent on the recruiting team, the internal recruiting team, to find them candidates. But you know what? They should be actively recruiting. I always say that executives are now, and not so much now, but even we've been writing resumes this way for over a decade. But executives, particularly, are also being evaluated on how they can bring top talent to come work for them. And so, if as a manager, right, or supervisor at a staff level, if you can start doing that and demonstrating that you have that skill to get good people to work for you by posting, by networking, by mentoring, people just starting out in your industry, or looking at multi-generational people that maybe want to start making career changes, or, because this isn't about just networking and mentoring people, younger people starting out. Like some people are doing career changes. And if you can show that you can have a multidisciplinary, right? If you're a CFO, you should be networking with marketing, HR, operations people. And if you're a mid-level manager, you should have people in your network who are younger than you and older than you, and a multi-generational network. If you can show that you have a multidiscipline, multi-generational, multi-industry network, you're going to be more likely to be considered for a job, because now you will help reduce recruiting costs and time, knowing that people want to work for you because you've put out a reputation that people are nurtured and developed by you. So it's going to make it easier for them to get people to want to work for you.
Oh,
right.
that's really great.
So having the ability to attract and bring in top talent and move them through a career trajectory that, you're developing people. That happens no matter what your job is, right? Everyone should be doing that, and that will make you a more attractive leader regardless of what your discipline is. But most people don't realize that. But being viewed as a leader that people want to work for is a trait that is very, very desired by companies.
And is that built through networking as well?
Yeah, built through networking, being invested in people, mentoring, giving back. Then people the talent wants to come talk to you. And then when you talk to them, you say, hey, this person might be good for my department. And that only happens because you're networking and giving back and putting yourself out there and treating the people who work for you well, fairly and well, right? So, and by well, I don't mean, it's only giving them a ton of money and only giving them, foosball tables and, coffee breaks. It's like giving people the ability to live their life, giving them the support that they need outside of work, just making sure you understand their goals so you can give them work projects that help them develop skills to meet those goals. When you are that kind of manager, people want to work for you.
You'll be able to recruit the best people then.
Yeah, and then the best people want to work for you because they want to advance their career and they know they can't do it on their own. They need a good manager to help them.
That makes sense. So in this like grand scheme of like recruiting, well, how does the resume fit into this whole thing?
Awesome question. The resume is about, if you had to put a percentage on it, about 20 to 25% of a job search, right? And yes, some people get hired without a resume, right? Because that's if you know somebody and you're networking, they're like, oh, I already know your work, so just submit the resume and it doesn't matter. Like even if you send it on pink scented paper by carrier pigeon, like people aren't going to care because they know your work. But the problem with that is eventually, if it's not a slam dunk hire with that person who knows you, if you don't have a resume that is written in an achievement, outcome, impact driven manner, and you have a task based document that looks like a job description with your name on it, if that resume has to go past that person who knows you to people who don't know you or don't know, don't maybe hold the refer and high regard. Not that it's bad, but they just don't know them that well. Or once your resume starts going past your first degree connections, if that resume isn't selling you with achievement statements, outcomes, and how you've made an impact in your work, it could fizzle. So your resume, your LinkedIn profile for that matter as well, is important for you to have to market you when you start venturing out past your sphere of reputation. When you start going beyond the people who know you, you need documents that sell you. Or they're going to be like, nah, I don't know. And more importantly, in this market, they're going to have 4 other people who are selling themselves more precisely behind you, right? So that's the key. You need documents that convey that you are a modern, contemporary leader who has achievements. You don't want to lead with seniority because seniority doesn't qualify any of us for anything. And, I was born in 1970. Do the math. What was all of us 1970 have in common? We all have 30 years of plus experience. So saying I have 30 years of experience doesn't qualify me for anything. Because sometimes people have 30 years of experience and they're amazing, and some people have 30 years of experience and kind of sucked at what they did, right? So 30 years of experience, 20 years, 5 years of experience, the years of experience don't qualify us for anything at any level. So the key is to lead with achievements, your outcomes, your impact that are relevant to the jobs that you are targeting. Speak to the people that you're targeting and show them those relevant achievements, not everything you've ever done, like, throw it in the kitchen sink kind of thing. Choose the achievements that you want to continue doing and make sure they're relevant to who you want to target. That's really the secret sauce of a resume.
It is like an achievement, like increasing the revenue of a company or reducing cost of a company.
It
Like
can,
it's always
some jobs are easily, I can easily come up with achievements like, made money, saved money, streamlined a process. But in some places, it's not as cut and dry. And you may have to look at achievements of, how you built or impacted a culture, how you mitigated risk, how you set up a succession plan of people to be developed and retained. It could even be how you compassionately let people go. Right. And what was the process of that? So it depends. Everybody's a little different, and some people, but a simple way and it's, not always simple, but the simple way I try to get people to think about this is because people are like, I don't know, I don't have achievements. I don't have access to the numbers. I don't have they'll come up with 50 reasons why they can't do it this way. And I'm going to be like, how does somebody know you're good at your job? Right? What does that good job look like? Or what would a crappy job look like? And how are you different from the crappy job? That's the story wherein lies your achievements, right? So how do you know you did your good job? How do you know you do a good job at what you do? what does that good job look like? Start there. Whether you are, making smoothies or whether you're a general counsel running, a $35 million legal department, right? So like of a, I don't know, $500 million company or something. Like and those numbers don't necessarily fly. I'm just spitballing here, but nobody's getting hired out of sympathy. Nobody's getting hired out of charity anymore for a long time. So you are there for a job for a reason. And, do you make more smoothies per hour than the rest of your team? Do you get, oh my God, this is the best smoothie I ever had, rating more than your team? Like, are you the best upseller of, getting bee pollen for $1 added to the smoothie and you have the best upsells, so AKA making revenue? Like, everybody has achievements. Everybody. That's how you have to come across at any level for any job, because companies need to see how well you do something and that you value achievement, because they can't teach you that. They can teach you the next job, they can train you on the next job, but they can't inherently train something within you that wants to do a good job. You have to come to the table with that. And articulating how you do your job well is part of your job to convey to the next employer why they should hire you. So if you think you don't have achievements, you better start thinking why you think that. And more importantly, you probably do. So either use the guides I just gave you, saying like, how do I know I did a good job, or what is a bad good job? What does a bad job look like? And then I'm the opposite. However, you got to think about it, or you got to hire somebody like, me to help you do it.
So like I'm picturing like the manager at the company. He has 4 resumes in front of him. They all have a lot of achievements. How does that manager choose which resume to go with? Like which achievements are like the better achievements?
So if they all really truly do have achievements, that would be a lovely dilemma for most hiring managers, because what most hiring managers are seeing now are AI written task driven resumes. They all look like a job description with somebody's name on it, and they don't know who can do the job, and they don't know the context. They don't understand how well anybody's doing the job. That's what's commonly happening. If it is a situation where the recruiter has 4, well done, achievement, outcome, impact driven statements on the documents for 4 candidates, they're going to look at who has the achievements that are pertinent most to the job, and to bring them in for an interview. Nobody's getting an offer based on a resume without a discussion, right? And then depending on what the job is, if it's a marketing job, they may be looking at your following online, because are you going to be helping with getting the message out and you need to have a following? Is it, a finance leadership job, and when they Google your name, they find out, candidate A has been speaking in front of finance panels and candidate B has never spoke, and they want someone who's more front facing and can negotiate with different, parties and has that ability. And so again, this is where your online presence could matter, right? So it just depends, right? It just depends based on the types of achievements and then the types of presence. And I don't say everybody should run out and go get an online presence either, because it might be a job that is in cybersecurity and they don't really want you to be out there that much. And so having a presence could actually hurt you. That's not the case with every cyber job, but there are companies who don't like it. So again, they're going to start looking at the cultural fit aspects of things that fit. And if you get rejected, if you have achievements on your documents and you are genuinely being the best you that you can, and you still don't get it, while it's disappointing, most likely it's often because you weren't the best fit. Like based on some of those, you might be too much out there on social media. Not that you've done anything bad, but they don't like the privacy. They want somebody who's private. And if you don't like being private on social media, you're going to be miserable at that job. So like sometimes it's just cultural for the company, what's best. And I'm just coming up with some hypotheticals here. None of this is absolute in any way, but these are just some scenarios that could exist and that I've seen.
So a resume shows the achievements. Does the resume also show that you'll be a good cultural fit as well?
It can, right? Because if you're, again, if you're going for a marketing job and it's important for that marketing person to have a following, putting that stuff on the documents is going to help. If somebody is not mentioning that and then they go look and they don't have a following, they may not get the traction, right? Or if it's an AI driven company and you've been really not in AI yet, or the other way around, you have companies that are not adopting AI yet. And if you're very AI-ish, they may think, oh, you're going to think we're boring and you're going to feel bored by us. That wouldn't be even if you don't get that job, it doesn't mean you weren't qualified. If you're the AI marketing genius, that would have not been a cultural fit because they think that you would have been bored. right? Or they have no interest in pursuing it yet, right? Maybe they have security concerns or, things like that. And they're still doing it in a little bit of a, 2022 kind of way, and it's working for them. So they're not interested in it. Okay, that's not going to be a good place for somebody who's very advanced in AI marketing to go. So that would be a good reason to get rejected for both parties, right? Because that won't work. So that's why I'm saying, like, sometimes when you're rejected, especially if you're not getting feedback, you just got to sometimes think the universe is guiding you where you're supposed to be, even though you may not know why, and you may have dodged a bullet. So that's the only thing we can do is maintain our mindset and realize the universe probably has a place for us. We just got to keep going.
So let's say the candidate got an interview. They show up at the meeting. How does the resume and the interview, like, how does that connect with each other? Do they usually ask questions about the resume?
Sometimes people ask about the resume, the recruiters or the hiring managers, whoever's doing the interviewing, and sometimes they don't. I'd say to prepare for that interview, generally speaking, you really need to know your resume bullets cold and have stories around each one. Your resume should not be a surprise to you, so even if you get help doing it, whether it's a coach or, a writer or AI, you need to know your resume cold. You need to have stories to back it up. The confidence of speaking about your resume is a presence that people are looking for. So I don't say executive presence necessarily, but a competency presence, because you can be staff level or mid-level, not an executive, and there's a presence that conveys your competency that people are looking for, and that comes from confidently speaking about what's bulleted on your resume. You need to know it and be able to tell stories about it. If I would research the interviewers, just have their stories a little bit from what you can see publicly, just cataloged in your mind, and maybe you mention achievements that correlate with projects they've done in the past, or maybe you both share a prior employer, even though you didn't know each other, or you both went through a certain training program, so they understand the training you had, even though you didn't know each other or go through it together. So you can just start to look for ways of delivering your story in such a way that the person listening, recruiter, the hiring manager, can make connections with you to understand how you've been raised, so to speak, developed, and then what you're targeting. And you're looking for ways to convey your story that make that connection with the person you're chatting with.
Do they usually ask you, like, more detailed questions about the achievements? Like, if you said you achieved something on
They
your resume?
will. I mean, some will, especially in technical roles, it's going to be a technical interview on many levels. How did you do the things you're saying you did? What's the story behind it? What were the challenges in doing that achievement? What did you run up against? Did you fail a couple of times before you put down this achievement that you did? Like, what's the story behind it, and where are the challenges? What was the resistance? So being able to talk about that conveys confidence. It conveys that you did it, and you're not just like pulling somebody else's achievement or inflating something, right? Like, the more you can talk about it in detail, it's going to convey a competency that will lend more to your credibility as a candidate and help you then appear more qualified than others that you might be competing against. Which is another, to go back to your question, if they have 4 very qualified, achievement-driven resumes in front, and they bring all 4 of them in, the one that's conveying the stories in a diplomatic, vulnerable way, talking about the failures, talking about the things they learned, not just making everything sound perfect. Those are the people that typically get moved forward, because, look, a lot of recruiters are suspect of perfect. So if you're not telling them, like, real stories of what you were challenged, what resistance you had, how you overcame resistance, where you maybe failed, that lack of honesty, not that you're lying, but just that lack of transparency can sometimes contribute to you being secondary if someone else is being really transparent. Because if somebody's being really transparent, that also sends the message that that's how you'll be on the job. So somebody knows that if something goes wrong on the job, you're going to tell them and not hide it and make everything perfect, right? So these are all subliminal ways that you can come across as a stronger candidate
Well, how do you draw the line between what you put on the resume and what you say at the interview? Like,
well, it is a marketing document, right? So the resume, the profile, they're marketing documents. So I would save the failures and the challenges and the resistance for the conversation. You don't need to say, like, I launched 3 projects that failed before this one succeeded. Like, you don't need to do that. In most cases, that will not be a good resume bullet. I can't say there isn't an exception now and again, but that might work. But I would say for most people, not doing that is a good thing. Generally, we don't go back more than 10, 20, 15, 20 years. For most people, 2 pages is more than fine. I've done CEO resumes of people with 40 years of experience and it's 2 pages. So the key is to be concise. The key is to be direct. Delete or diminish what you don't want to do anymore, because if it is included or prominently displayed at the top and you don't want to do it anymore, you're going to get calls for it. And then you're going to be like, well, people don't get me. So, especially if you're older, right, and you have more experience, the way you can make it shorter and succinct and specific is to focus on what you want to continue doing and then delete or diminish what you don't want to do anymore. If you're coming up in your career, you still maybe have to do some things you don't want to do just to get the exposure, get the skill set, build things like that. So I wouldn't necessarily delete everything if you're, entry or mid-career. When you're entry mid-career, people want to see that you're coachable, that you're trainable, and that you are achievement-minded if they give you the tools and the training to do the job. That's what you'll ultimately want to convey when you're, mid or junior level. But as you get older and you got a lot more experience, the way you diminish it is you get to 2 pages is by diminishing or outright deleting what you don't want to do anymore.
And like there's like humans looking at your resume, there's also AI looking at your resume now. Is there anything you do for the resume to optimize a little bit more for the AI as well?
Just there's really not anything you do differently. I mean, people may feel that that's wrong, but I'm on a board of an agentic AI company that develops agents for recruiters, and AI is just a tool. The way Boolean search is a tool, right? The way databases house information that you then search in the database, that's a tool. Printing out resumes in a stack and going through them one by one is a tool, right? Not effective, but a tool. So good recruiters, and I've had this validated at recruiting conferences that I've gone to, particularly one by Glenn Cathy from Randstad. Good recruiters are going to use more than one tool, because an AI generated list is going to have 10 candidates at the top that are going to be different than what the Boolean search list is going to produce, different than what a database list might produce, and different from eyeballs looking at a stack might produce. A good recruiter is not going to rely on one tool to find the best candidate. And the good recruiter is not only going to focus on the top 10, they're going to look at the bottom of the list of any of those tools too, because just being at the bottom of a list just means your resume may not be properly optimized for that particular tool, but it doesn't mean you're not qualified. Most passive candidates don't have an updated resume or profile. And if they only paid attention to who's at the top, and if they only paid attention to one tool like LinkedIn Recruiter or any of that, they are severely limiting finding great people, because great people are found outside of LinkedIn Recruiter, outside of AI searches. And so a good recruiter is going to look in a myriad of pockets, and they're going to look at the top of the list, the middle of the list, the bottom of the list. They're going to look. Those are all those tools: AI, Boolean search, LinkedIn Recruiter, the databases, right? Printing a stack for somebody's email. Those are all tools, and some favor more tools than others, but a good recruiter is always going to use more than one tool and never limit it to the top of the list. So always the key is just to write for people. Like, show how you're qualified. Don't play the keyword game. Because if you play the keyword game but have a bunch of tasks, that's why you're not getting in the interview. If you don't play the keyword game incredibly well and have the achievements, odds are you're still going to get an interview because you're showing how you can do the job. But the mistake I often see people make is they have terrible resumes that are very task driven, and they've keyword optimized it either themselves or using a tool, a keyword optimizer. But if you still don't have the right achievements, you can keyword it. A human will probably read it at some point, and you're still not going to get the interview. You have to show that you can do the job and do it well.
That makes sense. So how did you get started on the entrepreneurship thing back in 2009?
I was a recruiter for 13 years. And then in the downturn of 2009, a lot of people needed resumes. I was really good at writing resumes, even as a recruiter. And I saw that if the right resume, if I made some adjustments to a resume and sent it to my company client, they would interview the person. And I was on commission. The resume was a catalyst for me getting an interview and ultimately that person getting hired. When that person got hired, I made a fee. So I got really good at these things, making quick switches and quick things. But I found myself laid off in 2009, but I was also a little burnt out on the 13 years of recruiting I did, and I wanted to do something different. And in 2009, everybody needed a resume. This was when, Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers collapsed and all that stuff happened. So I just started charging. And I did some recruiting engagements, consulting assignments, and started writing resumes. And I was just going to see what took off. And the resume thing took off. It also helped that I liked it, and I really love doing them, and I was not burnt out on that. So that's probably why it took off too. But a couple of recruiting consulting engagements fueled the chameleon fire financially, and then ultimately the resume thing just took off. And now we have a team that's been with me for a very long time, and they're part of every client's success. We have like over 200 LinkedIn recommendations from clients who've invested in services and made a job change, and my team is a part of every one of them. So I'm honored and grateful and to be able to do this. So that's how it basically happened.
Like over the years, like how did you figure out the scope of the business? Like did you expand to like board resumes as well as like other types of resumes or other cover letters as well? How did you define the scope over time?
Well, when I started, in 2009, I mainly did resumes. And then I quickly saw that people needed the profiles, and having a great resume and a poorly written profile was not going to help anybody. And then people would say, like, I got the interview. Can you help me? So then I added interview coaching, and then I realized people sometimes had a resume and a profile and didn't know what to do with it. So we had to teach them how to network and how to conduct a proper job search. We have we work mostly with executives, but they will refer us, their professional level, partners, friends, spouses, and their adult kids. So we do work with others outside of executive set, mainly if they're looking for a corporate job. But what we found is that people just don't know how to network. They don't know how to conduct the job search. Specifically at the executive set, we have this little sweet spot of people who have been promoted, recruited, sought after their entire career, and they never had to do a proactive job search. Because people were always calling them or coming to them, or they knew a friend, and that sort of thing. And so to actively have to proactively do a job search, selling yourself, going beyond the people who know you, and reaching out cold to second, third, fourth degree connections is something most people do not know how to do. And so we teach them how to do that. And we even have a networking amplification service that helps you reach out to up to 1,200 people on LinkedIn over 3 months. It's done qualitatively. It's done, we're not spamming anybody. And I view LinkedIn as like one big room of people to meet someday. And you give us parameters of people you want to meet, and we come up with the list, and we help you drip the requests. And it helps you get another 300 to 500 first degree connections. It helps you to have another 60 to 100 conversations on average that you wouldn't normally have. And because it really is about networking. Like, networking is really the sweet spot where a lot of great hires happen for most people. Again, it doesn't mean you ignore job postings. It doesn't mean you'll never talk to a third-party recruiter. Where I find people struggle is if they only submit to job postings and they're not talking to people, or they're just hoping that third-party recruiter calls them, because if they can place them, then they don't have to actually do a job search. It's just not realistic for most people. And you really do need to network, especially as you rise up through the ranks.
Gotcha. So do they usually hire you when they're like trying to get more proactive, or like what's the
So people
optimal?
hire us to be ready, and they're not looking, and they're happy, and they just want to be ready. And then I have people that are unemployed 6 months, and they're like, I should have done this a while ago. And everyone in between. I kind of view this as like, I mean, we're clearly not insurance in a traditional sense, but sometimes people have insurance, right? If you think of your home, or, renter's insurance or home insurance, some people don't have it and then realize they needed it, and then they get it after something happens. And then there's some people, although sometimes it's required by law to have insurance, but you have an insurance policy and then you hopefully never need it, but at least if you do, you're ready, right? So that's or sometimes a lawyer, right? Most people don't need lawyers until they need a lawyer. Very few people keep them on retainer just in case. So it's always better to do this stuff ahead of time. Always. The networking building, the brand building, we call it executive marketing. Everybody buys into executive branding. Well, that's your identity. And executive marketing is the communication of that identity. That can all happen before you need it, right? It also helps you get speaking engagements. It helps you get recruited versus you doing a proactive search. Like, doing this stuff proactively is honestly music to my ears, and what I wish for everyone. Whether they hire me or not, do this stuff proactively even on your own. But if you need help, people like us are here. And if you don't do it and get to a point where you need it, the best time to start is there's two best times to start, either yesterday or today, right? So the key is to just start whenever you start and not have a lot of regret of how long ago you should have started. At some point, you just need to start.
Is it usually like aligned with the company that they currently work at?
I was hired a couple times by companies to do resume work to help their internal staff apply to promotions more effectively. They had a lot of openings and they had a lot of people who were not educated on how to go about applying for a promotion properly. And they had me come in and do like how to write your resume to get promoted. And so there are companies that are really smart and do that for their employees because then they, because if somebody doesn't know how to get promoted, doesn't know how to promote their work, and they get passed over, a good person, you run the risk of that good person being disgruntled. And so teaching people how to promote themselves internally can help you have happier people and retain top talent, and that the industry, the company knowledge doesn't go out the door because somebody's annoyed that they got passed over, partially because the company didn't have a proper process in place to recognize the talent, but also every employee needs to own the fact they need to promote themselves. You can't just sit around waiting for people to give you a promotion. And so getting that skill set, if a company gives it to you, that's like an amazing company. And I have been hired to do that a couple times.
That makes sense. And like as you're growing the business, well, how do you think about the right size of the business to aim for?
I've been in business over a decade, and I, definitely went through those phases where I'm going to grow this big, and I did. And I get further away from the person, the client, and while I have an incredible team, like I said, my team, most of them have been with me 6 to 15 years. And I'm very, very blessed. I like my clients are in great hands with them. I find that as the bigger I get further away from the client, and I really like just talking to people. That was the best. That even happened to me when I recruited. I rose through the ranks and I get further and further away from the placement, and I really like talking to the job seeker and the client. Under recruiting, the company and the client, and under Chameleon, I like talking with the job seekers and seeing what's going on. So it's to take nothing away from my team, but I like being a small business versus a big business because I get to just be more in touch with people, via LinkedIn, via Zooms, like all the things, email. I like being more in touch with people.
And I saw recently you had a new newsletter. What's that?
Yes, the Executive Marketing Edge. It's a LinkedIn newsletter, and I'm proud to say that in the first week it was launched, it got over 5,000 subscribers. So ping me and I'll send you the link for it.
And for the closing question, I always ask the guest, what's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you?
That's a great question. And, I've been so blessed that, I honestly think people do kind things for me every day. It would be really hard pressed to pick one, but I would say just my mom always believing in me, and I don't, people might say like, oh, it's your mom, but like, I don't think that happens for everybody. And I don't take it for granted. My mom always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself, is definitely sometimes that carried me through. Cornell was very, very good to me, and I would not have what I have, and I wouldn't have gone to Cornell if they didn't give me a first gen type scholarship or I should say grant. It wasn't a scholarship. I wouldn't have been at Cornell if they didn't do that. So I would definitely rank that as a top 10, if not the second.
Thanks for sharing, Lisa.